Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. And as we delve into this week's topic, a reminder that some of the content may be of a sensitive nature. Now, here's your hosts, Tim and Des.
Welcome to this week's Momentum. So good to have you tuning in. Really appreciate you doing that. It is Tim and Des with you once again. Let's go straight to Des this week. Des, how are you?
I'm really good. I was shocked that you came straight to me. I was wondering what was happening. It's all good.
Like to mix things up a bit.
That's all good. You know, guys, just by the way, let's not forget our website, momentumaustralia.org. We've got lots of information on there that will help you on your journey across all the topics that we cover on Momentum. And also all our podcasts are on there. And if you want to support us financially, you can do that also on our website. That would be really cool. And don't forget our care line, 1-800-000-MEN. That's 1-800-000-636. Guys, if you don't have anybody in your world you can talk to and you want to have a safe and confidential conversation, don't forget our care line, 1-800-000-MEN, provided by our friends at Careline Connections. And that's available 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., 1-800-000-MEN.
Very good. And of course, our YouTube channel too. You can check that out. If you're a YouTube fan, it's Momentum for Men, I think is what you go or you put into the space. And if you're not like me, you just go to the website, momentumaustralia.org, and there's a big button that says YouTube. And that's my preference anyway. But hey, in all seriousness, we are here to help you. And if you look through some of the topics in the podcast, by the way, you'll see that we've covered a vast range. I think it's around 150 episodes now. And you know, when Des and I first set up Momentum, the goal was to get very real, raw, honest, authentic, because as guys, you know, we can tend to hide. And we at Momentum wanted to kind of get into the icky stuff because this is real life. And often we don't talk about that stuff as guys. So you can have a look at the topics. Hopefully they will give you some insight and awareness and help you on your journey, as Des said. But this week's topic as well is another one of those that can be a little tense and not really talked about. And for many of us, addiction isn't something that we tend to think about. And yet the reality is, and the statistics show, that addiction is on the rise.
Yeah, in 2020, research showed us that about 2.6 million Australians had an addiction to either drugs and or alcohol, with around 6,000 Australians dying each year as a result of alcohol abuse. That's crazy, isn't it? Crazy number.
It is. And sad. And on top of drugs and alcohol, pornography addiction is fast becoming more and more prevalent, with the porn site Pornhub receiving 33.5 billion visits. That's just one site. Billion visits in the last 12 months. And sadly, Australia is ranking 8th worldwide for overall porn consumption. Aside
from the drugs, alcohol, and pornography, there are many other addictions. And this week, we're joined by the CEO of Focus on the Family Australia, our good friend Bett Ryan, to explore what addictions look like and how we can overcome it. Welcome back to Momentum, Bett.
It's a pleasure being with you once again. And thank you for just a light topic that I can just talk about.
We saved the light and fluffies for you, Bett.
It is frightening when you look at those statistics that it really says that someone in your world, somewhere along the line, whether it's a family member or a friend or a work colleague, they are going through that. And so we need to be better informed. And what do we do if we can identify somebody who has got an addiction, or alternatively, someone who actually says, that's me, I've got an addiction and I need to do something about it.
And it can be addiction to anything. It can be addiction to coffee, to food. The reason why people are so obese, even to using your iPhone and so forth, and stress or shopping or, prescription medication or even with work. There's so many addictions that we can have in our world. Sometimes we don't even recognize it as an addiction.
Oh, very much so. And the challenge is that some people will say, well, it's not an addiction because I'm in control.
Yes.
But the word addiction comes from the Latin word to be enslaved. And so if something's enslaving you or taking control of your life, whether it is, socially, relationally, vocationally, whether it's physically, financially, mentally, a variety of different things that can actually enslave us and take control. And it's either affecting us personally or it's affecting those around us. And that's when you have to say, enough's enough. I need to take control of this and get the right help.
Brett, that's a bit of a fine line, but I mean, let's see if we can kind of narrow that down for the guys listening, right? Because all of us will have stuff in our life that, I'll use the phone for me, for example, right? I will allow myself 20 minutes of scrolling on social media. And after 20 minutes, I'm mindful, go, right, okay, it's time to put this thing down. Sometimes I'll still be there an hour and a half later. Now, that's not every day, and that's periods. Where is the line drawn then to go, where am I kind of still in control, and where is it where it gets gray, where this thing has overtaken my life to a point where I am actually unable? Because I think the biggest challenge for a lot of guys is we kid ourselves that we're in control and I can give this thing up whenever. How do we kind of fine tune that and go, I'm in the stage of addiction, not just this is a big part of my life. No, it's actually trickled into an addiction.
Yeah, and you can say it's a fine line. Some things are easier to find. So whether it's that dependency on alcohol or dependency on a certain drug, they're very easy to define. And people say, well, that's an addict. That's a classic addict, put in inverted commas. We have this idea that, for example, you mentioned in your opening remarks about pornography. Do I need it? But the foundation is that the euphoria, the initial chemicals and the chemistry set in our brains, dopamine, for example, is that I get a feeling of euphoric experience. And you can say, well, I don't need it. But the next day happens and I say, I need it. I need that insatiable high. And then it will continue to affect us. And that will affect either gambling, drugs and alcohol, smoking. Because some people say, well, you mentioned also coffee. Do I need coffee? But then we become so regulated that without my caffeine in my system, I become agitated. I might get the shakes. I might become more cranky. I might become irritable. And those things, that is a sign that you're becoming more dependent on an outside thing that will actually stimulate you. And that's where it becomes a little bit more of a gray area. And then you have to actually say, well, is coffee an addiction? Well, it can be. And because it's physiologically affecting you. Now, it's not maybe going to be detrimental to your health and your family members. It may not affect you now, but there are other things that will compromise your health and well-being and will affect those around you.
That's very important.
Brett, when we talk about addiction, there's two types. There's chemical and behavioral, and we've kind of touched on that. But just for clarity, can you give us the difference between the two, chemical and behavioral addiction?
I'll back the track up a little bit with regard to there are some elements that they would say that we're predisposed. We've got a hereditary nature, that if someone in your family had an addiction, there is a predisposition that you may become an addict yourself. So then some people say, well, my dad was an alcoholic and I'm definitely not going to do that. So the pendulum swings the other way. Or alternatively, that can actually make your predisposition to that. Then there's the other side, is the developmental or the fact is that we have that the chemical reactions within our brain will cause us to have a feeling of good feelings within us, and we get a high, and I'll use that again, that high euphoric experience. But then there's another part of it that we're actually using other elements around us because of what we'd call the adverse or outside influences. Say we are actually injured in a car accident, for example, and then we start taking chemicals to numb the pain. Then that becomes that. So a circumstance has resulted in us taking something legitimate, and then it becomes illegitimate if we become connected to it. But then there's another side of things, is there's another pain that we may have had, maybe abuse that's taken place, something that's taken external from us. And we might have flashbacks of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then we're using chemicals because of an outside influence. So we haven't made the choice, but we've found something that actually numbs the pain. So those circumstances may give a better clarity of why someone may become an addict.
Let's just keep going on that theme, if you don't mind, Brett. And this is a little off the notes, but when you look at, and I just wrote down as you were talking, the mindset of addiction, is it fair to say that most addictions, the end result is only as a result of something unresolved that we haven't dealt with. Like we're using the addictive thing to numb something that we haven't really dealt with in our lives. Is that a fair comment?
Definitely. It may be feeling that there is something around us that we feel like we need it, something legitimate, that we feel that we're obligated to have something. And I'll use pornography as an example. We can legitimize that if we're not getting sex from our spouse, or we're a teenager or a young adult and we're not married and we don't have it. So we can legitimize something that we need it. And we rationalize something that it feels like, hey, I need to have this. And you justify the behaviors. So basically, we've got something that we feel like our needs are not being, or wants are not being met. I find something that I enjoy, and I justify that behavior. And that's the same thing. It could be even with drugs. Like I can justify my behaviors because it makes me feel good. Alcohol, it makes me feel good for a short period of time. But then there's that blurry line that where does it start from? I enjoy it, I'm in control, to being the point where I can't stop with one. I have to have 2, 3, 4. And there's something in our chemistry set in our brains that actually cause us to have our wiring within our brain, and it actually is. It's the hardwiring in our brain causes us to crave it, and we need it more and more. And it doesn't stop with just 1 or 2 things. It goes to 3 to 4 to 5 things, and then that's when we have to be very concerned about how it's affecting ourselves. And again, I'm harping on it. It is basically the really important. It's going to do you harm, or it will do harm of those around you.
Yeah, and possibly both, in fact. I mean, it's interesting just the impact on families and friends and so forth. It can be absolutely horrific. And I guess when you're caught in that cocoon of taking drugs or whatever, or even pornography, we don't really think about the broader implications to those around us, like family and close family and partners and so forth.
Oh, very much so. And we've probably had another conversation about pornography in the past in one of our podcasts. But the fact is, your spouse, for example, if you are married, how does it make them feel? They would never compete with a virtual world. So it makes them feel diminished. And guess what? It's going to be counterproductive, because they'll desire you less and therefore withdraw themselves. So you're actually, you're failing not only in your vows, removing yourself from that, and you might say, well, it's justified. But the fact is, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, because if your wife finds out, they're going to be repulsed, and they're not going to want to be intimate with you. So we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by finding unhealthy ways of coping with something that we're responsible for. And that's probably the key. And we'll talk about that in the second half of this conversation about where do we start?
Yeah, well, let's take a break there, and that's a good way to kind of end the first part of the show. By the way, Brett was just saying off air that they have stuff on their website, at the Focus on the Family website, that you can check out with regards to this, and this is families.org.au, families.org.au. We are talking about addictions with the CEO of Focus on the Family Australia, Bett Ryan. Our website, of course, momentumaustralia.org, for a whole bunch of resources too. But we're going to take a short break there and come back with Brett on the second half of this break. Stay tuned.
This is Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
Welcome back. So great to have you tuning into this week's Momentum with Tim and Des. And once again, we're joined by the CEO of Focus on the Family Australia, Bett Ryan. This week, we're talking about addictions and addictive behaviors. And we covered a lot of ground in the first part of the show, essentially setting up what it looks like, how we identify if we might be struggling with something and it's kind of trickled over into the addictive space. So Brett, then let's I suppose start unpacking that. Once we've come to a realization that whatever it is in our life has become a problem, how do we start taking steps to unpack some of that?
I wish it was that easy.
The 3 steps to get us clean.
Unfortunately, the person who is an addict is often the last person to know how it's affecting them or those around them.
Yes.
And you could say they're in denial, and that could be the truth. They're just completely oblivious to or naive to how it's in fact affecting them and those around them. The other side of things is that others are noticing, and they may have shared their concerns, but they also diminish that they're saying, you're overreacting. I've got it under control. I like my alcohol. I like a few little, I like having these things. They're not a bad thing for me. They're completely naive. And so I think it's important that when someone shares with you their feelings and has the courage, and sometimes it can be a very courageous conversation, to actually say to them, this is how it's impacting me. It could be your wife. It could be your children, for example, or those around you that care for you, or it could be your boss that has identified these things. If they've had the courage to share their observations of how it's impacting them, that whether they're becoming more irritable, whether they're becoming more late, their productivity is not as good, that they're removing themselves from family and relationships, that they're disconnecting. As I said, there's a myriad of different types of addictions that we could actually have us go through. And if they're making that aware to you, try and take notice of it, because it is a brave conversation. But for those who know somebody going through an addictive behavior, you can't force them to get help. You can coach, you can encourage, you can even identify the issues, you can share with them how you're feeling, but you can't force them to get help. They need to have to take responsibility for themselves. They've been responsible for getting themselves into the situation. Therefore, they're the primary responsible person to get them out of it. Now, it doesn't mean they have to get others around them to help them, but they have to identify it themselves that I need to do the hard yards.
Yeah, and that's very true. But I've got a friend of mine who is addicted to alcohol, has been through rehab a few times. And the biggest problem is he doesn't yet identify that he has to fix his problem. That he has something that he needs to address. And until you get to that point, you're not going to make any progress.
Let's keep moving on then to, I suppose, unpacking, Brett, what is happening for us if we're trying to come out of an addiction. And I suppose there's a couple of things. There's the chemicals that we either put in our body or that get changed in our body, and then, of course, what that does to our brain. So there's a couple of things, I suppose. It's almost like hitting a reset, I suppose, within your own body. Is that a good way to describe it?
Very much so. And that's the reason why you have to do, say it's, for example, your friend Des with alcoholism and it's affecting him. People say that, well, you just stop it, just stop it. But you can't necessarily do that. Sometimes you need to have, and I saw this, I was a nurse for many, many years prior to becoming a pastor and prior to me becoming a focus, that people would need to have a sort of a medicinal or a chemical pharmaceutical regime to help them transition, because otherwise they'll have the delirium, the DTs they call it, the delirium tremors. And the same thing with drugs. They have to do it in, there can be the cold turkey, but they might need to have other drugs to help them transition out of the chemical confusion within their brain to become clearer of mind, clearer of heart, detoxing from their system. So we sometimes need to have professional help. Now, we've all heard of stories that people who were addicts come to Christ, completely cold turkey, no dramas, and they've had a new way of looking at the world. And that is a wonderful testimony. And I would love to have that story happen to many, many, many more people coming through to realize that they can't do this alone. They need God in their world. But then there's other times where God can be there and they can even make a decision to become a follower of Christ, but they also need professional help to navigate either the psychological aspect, to have counselors or psychologists, sometimes psychiatrists, that they can actually prescribe medications to help you with that journey. Other times you might need to have professional help to release your, why did you turn to these addictions? The past, the hurt, the processing, whether you were abused, whether you had a traumatic thing, we have to process the psychological side of things of why you turn to these addictive behaviors in the first place. Once we get to the root cause of these addictions, then we can identify them and then we can deal with them appropriately.
So for guys listening, Brett, I mean, you've kind of touched on a whole bunch of stuff there, which is fantastic. But if guys have just had a wake-up call in the last 20 minutes or so that we've been on this conversation, and they go, you know what, I feel a little convicted or compelled. It's like, actually, you know what, there is this thing in my life. I need to do something about that. What do you think is a first or good starting point for most men to start that process?
Well, identifying is 50% of the journey. If you can identify the issue yourself, you're 50% of the way there. Then the next and the hardest thing is to identify someone that you can actually disclose this to. And I think you said it before beautifully, Tim. The fact is, I can't fix the problem, but I can come alongside you. And that's one of the greatest gifts you can give to is your presence. You're simply being there through the difficulties, through the hard times. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have the answers, but I can come alongside you. So knowing that any addiction, once an addict, you're always going to be an addict. That you're either going to be practicing or non-practicing, and that's something to be identified. You know, once an alcoholic, you're always going to be an alcoholic. You're either going to be practicing or non-practicing. Pornography, the temptation is always going to be there. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to put myself, when I'm tempted, I'm going to ring up a mate and say, I'm really tempted. Can we go and shoot some hoops? Can we go and do coffee? Removing yourself from the temptation and making yourself accountable to others.
Yeah. And just quickly pointing back to one of our previous shows earlier this year with David Dusek on accountability, I encourage you to have a listen to that, which you can find either at the podcast space or momentumaustralia.org. Brett, as a final thought before we wrap up the show, we've talked a bit about, I mean, that's our own stuff, identifying that, dealing with that, which is powerful, and thank you for that. But as a final thought, you mentioned earlier in the show about the impact that this will have on somebody around us, and if we're married or have a partner, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just flip that as a final thought to go, if someone listening is married or they're in a relationship and they suspect, right, that there's something not quite right, what might be some indicators? Because obviously they're going to watch and they observe and whatever. What might be some indicators that we can look out for in our marriage or with our friends or whatever that might just indicate that something isn't quite right there, that we may need to be bold and have a conversation with?
Well, it also depends on what the addiction is.
Yes. Sure.
Say, for example, alcohol, you know, they'll be either drunk, have multiple bottles around them, whether it's pornography, they're doing things in secret, they're being more and more suspicious or concerned that you're going to look and doubt them, and so they're doing things in isolation. I think that you have to go with your gut feeling. You will know that there's something not quite right, and go with your gut feeling. So then once you've actually you've got something, and sometimes they can say, I've kept it hidden. Now, they're very, very few that can keep an addiction hidden. I can't even think of many. It will come out somewhere along the line. It will ooze out because of their addictive behaviors. So once you've actually identified your concern, is to share your concerns. Identify how that makes you feel, not accusatory. This is how it's impacting me. Once you've shared and how they respond to that, they can either react and say you're overreacting, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You've shared your concerns. Then you have to actually make the decision what you're going to do with that information. Now, it might be, as I said before, it may be a healing separation. If you don't get the right help, I'm going to remove myself. I'm always going to love you and care for you. But if you've got a loved one and maybe you don't live with them, maybe you're not, in that close relationship, I've shared my concerns. They need help. If they choose not to, if it's affecting you personally, therefore you may have to remove yourself because it's toxic. And they're harder conversations. So again, step by step, you don't just do like a split the switch and say, our marriage is dissolved because of the situation. They need help. Same thing with a mental health issue. Just because someone has a mental health issue doesn't mean that at the end, you're going to be there through the highs and lows of a relationship. And I think that's really important, that it doesn't dismiss or justify why you could remove yourself from the situation. Do what you can. But if it is affecting you, you can give yourself grace to actually say, I might feel guilty about this, but it is I need to protect myself in all of this. And if they don't get the right help, then I can't help you any further.
Yeah. Look, in all fairness, if this has brought some stuff up for you, that's one of the reasons why we have a care line, 1-800-000-636. If you do need a confidential conversation, 1-800-000-636. There are, of course, lots of other organizations and people you can reach out to as well. And if you'd like to reach out to us at Momentum, jump online to the website, momentumaustralia.org, and flick us an email. It will be completely confidential, but we can try and point you in the right direction to get you some help as well. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, families.org.au. Families.org.au is the Focus on the Family Australia website. Lots and lots of resources on there. And of course, momentumaustralia.org. Our special guest has been the CEO of Focus on the Family Australia, Bett Ryan. We've been talking about addictions this week. Brett, a really great topic. Thanks so much for your information in there, mate. A lot in there. And always appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. For more information or to hear this week's show again, go to momentumaustralia.org. You can also access a whole range of resources to help you on your journey and to get in touch with the team at momentumaustralia.org. Until next time, keep moving forward with Momentum.